Hello, today we're speaking with pianist Conor Hanick, who will be performing Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue with the Phoenix Symphony November 22nd, 23rd, and 24th in our classics concert series entitled Rhapsody in Blue, a 100th anniversary celebration. Conor, welcome.
Hello, and lovely to join you virtually.
Yeah, it's great to have you and to see you again. And, both of us met when we were pretty young in our careers back at the Spoleto Festival USA in Charleston, South Carolina. I recall being absolutely mesmerized by your playing. So I'm really excited that our Phoenix audience will get to experience what I saw and heard over a decade ago. So we'd love to learn a little bit about you and what we're going to be hearing from you coming up in November.
Thank you. That's very sweet of you to recall that. I think I've advanced since 10 years ago, but I guess you can tell me.
So where did you grow up, Connor?
So I grew up in Iowa City, Iowa, and went to public school there through high school, and then went to Chicago, which is about hours east of Iowa City, which is where I did my undergraduate in Evanston at Northwestern. And then I went further east and have been in New York for graduate school, doctorate, and that's where I make my home now. But yeah, public schools in Iowa City. That's where it all started. And I actually, uh, the piano is not my first instrument. The viola is weirdly. And I started viola when I was in third grade in like the elementary public school system for music, with all my other friends. Switched over to violin, and then I started piano when I was about 10, so relatively late, but music was kind of in my life from a very early age.
I'm curious, Connor. I'm hearing that you started on the viola and the violin. How does that influence what you're hearing as a solo pianist?
Yeah, I mean, I approach especially something like concerti very much from like a chamber musician's vantage point. And I play a lot of chamber music in my sort of civilian life, and playing a string instrument is hugely helpful. I mean, you have to learn kind of how to adapt to different modes of making music, and playing with woodwinds is so much different than playing with percussion and playing with conductors and all this. It's like the time warps in these kind of unusual, but once you understand it, very predictable ways, or maybe not predictable, but ways that you can anticipate at least. And yeah, I mean, I just learned so much about sound production and what it takes to create a beautiful sound on a different instrument before I played the piano, when I have this very easy, accessible way of making a beautiful sound. It's very much not that way on the violin. You can ask my parents. I mean, it's just a, a much more complicated way of getting to the real core of the instrument. Um, and I think having that process, I mean, it helps my piano playing a lot too, because obviously piano playing is not as simple as just a sort of binary on and off switch, as much as that is very much part of the instrument. But I mean, there's so much nuance and complexity to generating a variety of tones and sort of having a palette of colors. And I feel like having a string instrument background helped me with that for sure.
Well, and that's I think it's amazing to be able to have the talent to go from from a string instrument to a percussion, technically piano, and certainly to be able to to understand what other people in the orchestra are actually doing. I'm sure that makes you a much more a sensitive player to what's going on around you. That's really cool.
I think concerto playing, especially if you're not approaching it with a sort of collaborative mindset, there's so much more that can go wrong. And there's so much that can go right, and there's so many aspects of the music that can be illuminated and sort of brought to the surface if you're thinking in sort of more three-dimensional terms.
So you're performing George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, which was premiered 100 years ago this year. Would you give us an interesting fact about the Rhapsody in Blue that not everyone might know?
Oh man. Well, I mean, it's such a storied piece. And I imagine that there aren't many facts that your audience wouldn't know. I mean, I'm learning new things about it every day. I mean, just from a sort of musical perspective, and the more I read about the context and sort of how it was conceived, there are just so many layers, complicated layers to just how this piece came into existence. But I think, well, there are two things that maybe are fairly well-known facts, but more trivia pieces about this magnificent piece that I really love. One is that probably its most iconic musical feature, which is the opening clarinet solo, is actually not composed by Gershwin. It was composed. It was improvised by the clarinetist from the premiere, who's this guy named Ross Grossman, who was in the original band that for the premiere in February, I believe, in 2024 or 1924 in New York City. And apparently, as Gershwin's biographer put it, it was kind of a joke that was being played on Gershwin. It was like the second rehearsal, and in the original score, the glissando is written out. It's just an F major scale, and the clarinetist in a rehearsal did the glissando, and Gershwin loved it so much that he incorporated it into the score. So I love that. It's like the most, striking and I'm sure a completely arresting thing to hear first thing in this very, very avant-garde piece for the day isn't even Gershwin's.
I mean, those
Um,
jokester clarinet players, I tell you, you know.
yeah, right, right, right. I also I read that in the at the premiere there was just kind of a who's who of the early 20th century New York music scene. Like Rachmaninoff was there, Stokowski, Heifetz, Fritz Kreisler, all of these just remarkable musicians all hearing this piece for the first time together.
Yeah, 1924 seems to have been a like this pivotal year. Like every single between the paths of classical music, they seem to cross in 1924. And before we get into a little bit of that, I just wanted to ask a little bit further about the piece. If there were any technical challenges that you've been facing that exist in the Rhapsody in Blue that are comparable to other classical piano concertos that you may have done previously.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting facet of this piece, this sort of mixture of style and modality and sort of expressive language. And clearly, I mean, one of the conceits of the piece, and actually part of the experiment for commissioning it, was to sort of reconcile is the wrong word, but to sort of bridge this stylistic gap between the avant-garde jazz, traditionally black uh, improvisatory language that was going on that basically is the bedrock of American jazz, and kind of putting it in this other more traditional highbrow cultural context. And that was the whole conceit of the program. And because of that, I think of the piece really as not sort of a co-opting or an elevation or things like this, but like a real melting pot of style. Because it's not only jazz and sort of classical music, but there's Spanish music, there's Yiddish theater music, there's hurdy-gurdy music, there's all this other stuff that's going on in the language that is so of the time that's it sounds like what America was in that period of our history. And Gershwin, of course, himself was an immigrant and was so entrenched in all these other types of musical styles. Um, and so, yeah, it manifests in the piece in all these fascinating ways. And as an interpreter, you have to make a lot of dicey decisions because you don't want to kind of lean in too much to just this um, overly stylized improvisatory language, but at the same time, you don't want to make it sound like a sort of classical concerto with all of its sort of formalistic design. And so you really have to kind of put the weights and measures up against these considerations and make choices that are both, paying homage to the real meat of the music and the real spirit of the music while still having it make sense for your own sort of interpretive lens. But in terms of just like technical challenges, I mean, the piece is so obviously indebted to the great romantic concertos. I mean, Rachmaninoff, who was at the premiere, I mean, so much of the big middle movement, the slow movement, third movement is like straight out of Rachmaninoff to or Tchaikovsky or things like this. So there's this sort of nod to classical style while still embarking on these really wild and kind of avant-garde jazz idioms.
Going back to what we had alluded to, that our audience might not know that all of the other pieces on this particular program were all written in 1924. Every one of them are celebrating their 100th birthdays this year. Of course, the Rhapsody in Blue being the most famous, probably the most performed. In your study of the Rhapsody in Blue, what were some of the musical influences that you think? And we kind of mentioned that Rachmaninoff was there, but like, what were some more of the musical influences that you think were happening in that particular year, or around that time?
Yeah, I mean, there are few points in music history, certainly like 20th century music history and 21st century music history, that you feel all of this sort of potential energy that is just sort of stewing. And to me, I mean, it sort of has these explosive gestures in pieces like this, or in some of Stravinsky's pieces, which were very much happening. I mean, Schoenberg and Gershwin famously became friends when they were both in LA. And I just love that all these musics coexisted and occupied such distinct spaces. But all of their composers sort of had this, I don't know, kind of nod and knowing of everyone else's sort of style and steering of the musical direction. And often it was so against the grain of the other that that ended up becoming kind of the point of a lot of these pieces, and rebelling against or borrowing from. I mean, certainly in the case of Stravinsky, he was making a very vast commentary on sort of classical style and neo-Baroque style, and trying to kind of reverse engineer a lot of the forward momentum of modernism from the early 20th century. Sorry, this is becoming like a dissertation stuff, but you know what I mean? I
It's
mean,
okay.
it's just so it's so fascinating that these things coexisted. And to me, a lot of it is kind of building in its potential energy until World War II, when the whole thing, I mean, the whole world literally explodes, and composers no longer could look backward. They only had an ability to kind of see what was in front of them, which is a complete blank slate. And so you had a lot of composers that had zero interest in history or a history of style or even a tradition, and were forging these new paths. That has less to do with 1924, but it's it's all in the air when these pieces are being written. Um, Stravinsky Concerto for Piano and Winds, which
Yeah.
you and I have discussed, that piece was written the same year and couldn't be more different in a lot of ways than the Gershwin. But at the same time, the original orchestration for the Gershwin, I don't know if it's exactly the same, but it's pretty close. I mean, there are no
Pretty
violins
close.
in the Stravinsky, but to have this sort of brassy, edgy tonality that was clearly in both of their ears, I think is so interesting.
Right, and to see what the paths that both Stravinsky and Gershwin took after their famous piano concerti from that year, it's pretty amazing. I'm pretty sure you've been communicating with our guest conductor for this program, Christian Reif, the delightful young conductor from Germany. And what's it been like to work with Christian so far, preparing for these concerts?
Yeah, Christian, I can't claim that he's an old friend yet, but he feels like an old friend. We were fast friends actually through a project that I did with his partner Julia Bullock, and a remarkable singer. Um, and yeah, through Julia, I met Christian, and he's just such a delightful, thoughtful, funny, but deeply feeling musician. And we've had the opportunity to work on some ensemble pieces together. A group that Julia Bullock and I are a part of called AMUC, the American Modern Opera Company. I mean, it was Julia's project, but I was fortunate to play in it. But it reimagined John Adams' El Nino, an oratorio that's based on the Nativity, and Christian conducted it brilliantly. And so I think every Christmas season now for about 3 or 4 years, I've been able to work with Christian on that piece. And we're always scheming about projects to do together. And I was so thrilled when the opportunity to work with him on this project came up because he's fabulous, and all of this music will be in such good hands with such a thoughtful conductor.
Will this be your first time in Phoenix?
I think it will be my first time not at the Phoenix airport. Um, and I'm slightly ashamed to say that. I God, I've been kind of in the Southwest. I've spent a lot of time in New Mexico and Utah, and not a lot of time in Arizona. So I'm very much looking forward to it.
Oh,
And I also in Southern California. So it's like I need to complete the quadrant of states to claim I'm a true Southwest tourist.
yeah, truly. It'll be very beautiful at that time of year.
Oh,
Um,
fabulous.
so no worries about rain or anything here. So anyway, you'll have a great time.
Great.
But what are you looking forward to the most about working with our Phoenix Symphony Orchestra?
Well, I mean, it'll be my first time playing with the orchestra, and that for a soloist is always um, extremely exciting and also a little nerve-wracking because you want to make a good impression, of course. But I know a number of players just from school that have landed in the orchestra and have heard so many just wonderful things about the group, how welcoming and collegial the whole atmosphere is. So I'm looking forward to making music. Some of the most friendly, gregarious, open-hearted, warm music that exists for us to play with hopefully some new, very good friends.
That's wonderful, Connor. We're really excited to have you here in Phoenix, and once again, thank you so much for talking with us today. It's great to see your face after all these years again, and it'll be wonderful to have you here.
Yeah, likewise. I'm super excited and great to see you too.
Thank you, Connor. Don't miss the Phoenix Symphony at Symphony Hall, downtown Phoenix, November 22nd, 23rd, 24th, in Rhapsody in Blue, a 100th anniversary celebration with pianist Conor Hanick and conductor Christian Reif, leading the Phoenix Symphony in music that also premiered 100 years ago in 1924, including Honegger's Pacific 231, Sibelius's devastatingly beautiful single movement Seventh Symphony, and Respighi's effervescent and evocative Pines of Rome. We'll see you at the Symphony.